Turn over to the book of Hebrews. That's where we are for a while. And we're going to be looking at chapter 1. Andrew gave us a kind of a quick overview last week. We're looking at this book for probably several months on Sunday evenings as we learn more about this incredible book. I really like the book of Hebrews. It's not one that we should be afraid of. I think I commented last week or whenever we started this that Hebrews, Romans, and Revelations were never taught when I was a kid. People were afraid of the books. They were too complicated. They took too much time to go through. And so all of the teaching and preaching in the area I grew up in was Acts and one of the Gospels, with a few sorties into some of the writings of Paul. But we never got into Revelation or Hebrews or Romans. So when I finally discovered these books, they were fascinating. This is an eye-opening book, and I hope that you will read at least the chapter we're working on. It's only 13 chapters. It doesn't take a lot of time to read through, but it is filled with golden nuggets all the way through it. Might announce before we get into this that I did call Jerry Schroeder. Ann is doing okay. We came to the memorial service yesterday, and then he took her out in a wheelchair, and it was kind of curious what the situation was, but she just apparently had some heat issues and some hydration issues, and so she was better. By the time they got home, she was doing quite well. So he thanks everybody for their prayers and concern. Okay, what I would like to do as we start tonight is, before we get into Hebrews, I'd like to read through some really important verses. So I need some readers. Jerry, would you read John 1 through 4? Denny, would you read John 4, 22 through 26? Huh? Yeah, we're doing John. On the board, see it says John. It's John. John 4, 22 through 26. Dawn, if you could read John 5, 16 through 19. And then, anybody else want to read? Keith, you want to read 1 John 1 through 4? These are passages that tell us something, and we're going to discuss them after we read through them. They are some of the many passages that talk about the unique personality, the unique place, the uniqueness of Jesus' being. And so let's start with John 1 through 4.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men.
Yep. And then John 4, 22.
For salvation is of you worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when true worship will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father is seeking such to worship him. God is the Spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth.
And I think another verse may finish it off there.
Oh, excuse me. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he.
Right. And then John 5. Huh? Don?
And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
All right. And then 1 John 1.
What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we beheld and our hands handled, concerning the word of life. The life was manifested, and we have seen our riches of thank you, eternal things, we write, so that our joy may be made complete.
When we read John, he seems to have a passion to communicate what? What is he saying in these 4 and probably another 5 we could put up there? What is he trying to tell us about Jesus? He's what? Came in the flesh. He's God. He's more than just a man. He's something special. This was a problem that the Jews would have. The Gentiles could almost receive this much more easily than the Jews could. They expected the Messiah to come in totally different fashion than what Jesus came. And so one of the many reasons that the book of Hebrews is written is to clarify and to emphasize the uniqueness of Jesus. But even more than that, the book is all about making sure that you don't leave the faith, that you don't leave the Christian faith as a Jew and go be pulled back into Judaism or some other religious group. Judaism came to an end when Jesus died on the cross. We read several places that the law of Moses was completed with the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so even though they continued to worship and to be Jews in a cultural sense, that law, that world was now complete. And one of the reasons that Paul is writing this is to further confirm that that is the truth. Of course, they didn't have a Bible. It would be very hard for a person that was of the Jewish background to become a Christian, short of seeing the miracles that took place and then the convincing that provided to them. But there are a number of things in this book that I think are very interesting. We don't know who the author was, but many people think it's Paul. Some even think it's Paul that wrote it in Hebrews, and it was translated into high-level Greek by someone. We don't know. It doesn't sound like Paul by those that know how to interpret such things. It's somebody that really knew the Jewish religion as well as Christianity, and it could bring those together. It's just as useful to us today as it was for them. As a matter of fact, I think it's equally, if not more useful for us as we try to see and understand the uniqueness of Jesus. It shows clearly that Jesus is not a created being. This is important. This book really helps us understand some of the uniquenesses of Jesus and helps us as we talk with some neighbors that might have some other beliefs, such as Jesus was the product of a physical father and mother, that he was not resurrected, and all those kinds of things. Well, this book would help us prove that that is not the case. And then, of course, Jesus is greater than the angels. Have you ever read anything about the Jewish religion and angels? They really were into angels. And they had angels doing all kinds of things. And so when the writer of Hebrews talks about Jesus being greater than the angels, they would perk up at that, because the angels were really special. They were special messengers and did things for God, in their version of things that we wouldn't believe. But he's showing here that Jesus is not just greater than the angels, he's the creator. And when we read Genesis 1, which we will in a little bit, we're going to be impressed with the idea that Jesus is involved in the very creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. In John 1, he's talking about that creation. And this book helps us better understand how that could be so. So those are some of the things we get out of chapter 1. Hopefully we'll get through some of that. The book helps the Hebrews from falling away. This book probably written between roughly 63 and 65 AD. What happens in 70? Jerusalem falls, but what happened before that? About 65, the Jews went into revolt. And we had from 65 to 70 what's called the Second Jewish Wars. And they were trying as best they could to arm themselves against Rome. Of course, they had nothing to do that with. And Vespasian came down, and then his son Titus destroyed Jerusalem. And how badly was Jerusalem destroyed? Not one stone was left on another, and Jesus talked about that in Matthew 24. And that's exactly what happened, further evidencing that the Jewish law, the law of Moses, was no longer of importance or value to them as something to follow. It was written to show how Jesus is greater than Moses, greater than the law, and greater than angels, and greater than the priesthood. And to the Hebrews, to the Jews, this would be really ear-perking You know, you've heard things, well, that's interesting, let me listen to more. That's what this book helps the Jewish reader do, perk them up and help them see that there's something really unique and special about Jesus. It's written to show that Jesus is more than an angel or man, that he is indeed God. So let's read together the first few verses of Hebrews 1. Anyone want to read verses 1 through 1, 2, and 3? Is that a rather bold statement? I think this is a very bold statement. At the very, very beginning, right off the bat, he's declaring that Jesus is more than just a man, that Jesus is the creator, that Jesus is part of the creative force. Anything you pick up as you read through this? Is there something special in your reading of this passage?
He's a rating, he's an imprint or a mirror image.
Mm-hmm.
Glory of God.
He's
an exact
copy,
copy.
even more than a copy. It's the essence.
It's an affirmation, number one, of the fact that God did speak through the Old Testament prophets.
You know, if you're in high school speech or you're learning how to give a speech, there's a thing called a motivated sequence. And the first thing you want to do is grab the audience's attention and hopefully not let go of it. And you make a statement, you say something up front that grabs a hold of the audience's attention. I dare say that these first few verses do that. They grab your attention and you say, wait, what else can he say here? And he never lets go until the end of chapter 13. Well, let's look at some things that this passage has here. I'm going to go to another slide and come back to that one. How did God speak in the past? Well, first of all, he spoke directly to the patriarchs. Who are some of the patriarchs that God spoke to? Okay, we got Adam and Eve to start with. Who's some more? Moses. Noah. He did a lot of direct communications, didn't he? And so that's one way in which God did that. How did he speak through angels? How was the law of Moses given? Through angels. Other occasions where God spoke through angels. Gideon? Yeah. How about Jacob? Jacob wrestles with an angel all night. Sodom and Gomorrah, right. And those two angels didn't hang around long. They went back down to do their work, and the other one stayed there, who was called what? The angel of the Lord. That's always an interesting little study. So he spoke through patriarchs, he spoke through angels, he spoke through vision and dreams. What are some of the visions and dreams you can think of? Jacob and that ladder with the angels, okay? Peter has, yeah, but that's in the New Testament. So we got to back up a little bit. That's true. So he's used visions and dreams a few times. We don't have too many visions and dreams today. How did...
Joseph was allowed to interpret somebody else's.
Yep. He speaks in maybe multiple ways at the same incident. How about prophets? I mean, we've got prophets all over the place. And he spoke. How did he talk to these prophets? We really don't know. But in some way, he said, Micah, Jeremiah, you do this, He spoke to them in some way, and they went and did what God told them to do.
I've often wondered if he spoke to them through the Holy Spirit, as he did the Apostle Paul, Peter, and all the writers. Those are words of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the actual mechanism, but we believe that he did, and that they had incredible memories that they could go and remember. Does it not strike you, all of the stuff that they needed to remember? Of course, they were instructed in such a way that they could do that. What are some other ways that God spoke? Jerry?
He spoke to another person. So the prophet would give a prediction of what's going to happen, such as Sarah, and Samuel's.
Yeah. Yeah, you got the burning bush, which is an angel type thing, I'm sure. It's something different. He wrote on a wall one time. Yeah. He wrote the 10 Commandments in some way. He even talked through a donkey. I mean, God has used a lot of different ways over a long period of time to communicate what he wants man to know, at least the Old Testament folks to know. But it says, above all of those ways, he selected a different way to speak to us. And that is how? Through Jesus, through the Christ. So if you're a Hebrew guy, you're a Jew, and you're reading this, and you think, wow, these folks really liked their Old Testament heroes, and we do too. But they took it more internal. So it's really a challenge to some of them to think Jesus is greater than these guys.
Well, I was thinking of Pharaoh too. He wasn't very much on the side of God, but he spoke when he was talking. He actually was revealing what God was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
A couple of times you have that kind of situation. Even remember Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. He even relates some things and wrote a letter praising God. So God has spoken in many different ways throughout the years, but he has spoken through Jesus in these last days. And we'll talk about the last days in just a moment there. Yes.
Isn't it amazing? All of these people talked to them, and they saw people destroyed. They saw
Yep.
entire families destroyed, cities destroyed, based on these various ways. And they still didn't do what they said.
Yeah.
They still didn't do it.
It is just amazing that the power that God has displayed, and yet people deny what is reported, what is said. And I guess maybe.
They were standing next to you, and the earth opened up, and you saw their whole brick go in the ground. Would you not straighten up?
I probably, to answer your question, I would.
I'm saying people, they didn't always do that. And it would last.
A short period of time sometimes, yeah. Even speaking through miracles sometimes doesn't get their mind in the right place. We get so stuck in the way we think about things. So, but I thought it would just be interesting to look at some of the different ways in which God spoke, and spend a little time on that. Just reading through some of the actual lines in the passage here. But in those last days he has spoken to us by a Son. And the Son, of course, is Jesus. But it's interesting, he didn't say immediately he's spoken through Jesus. He says a Son. And he emphasizes, which sounds more prioritized, a Son or Jesus? To me, it's, he's speaking through us through his Son. There's power and there's honor in such a phrase like that to me. And he says he's appointed the Son heir of all things. Now we're going to look at some of these things more specifically in a minute. But the heir of all things, what a world is that? We'll talk about it. And through him he created also the world. Now we're getting into some heavy stuff here. The same Jesus that was crucified was the creator? I mean, this is really, really challenging. And he reflects the glory of God and bears the very stamp of his nature, upholding the universe by the word of his power. When he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. That's a lot of stuff in just 3 verses. And to unpack that, if you're going to do a detailed study, would need more than one night just to look at these verses alone. But let's look at some of the things here that kind of show us, and this is point number 2, 7 things that describe Jesus. And let's talk about these for a minute and get your input. The first one is, he is appointed heir of all things. Now, what is an heir? An heir is someone that's going to receive, you're a beneficiary, you're going to receive something following the death of a loved one or something like that. You're an heir. He's the heir, the inheritor of all things. Well, I don't know if that really defines it well, but what is it that Jesus is the heir of? What did you say, Chair? What God is? Okay. I mean, you just let your mind wrap around this for a minute. Jesus is the heir of all things.
Could we say that Jesus owns the earth, the world, and everything inside it? Because he created it.
Yeah.
So he actually owns it. So there has to be something more, something a whole lot higher.
Than this world. And when it says an heir, does that mean that someone is above that person or greater than that person or has the property to bestow upon someone else? In a way, it kind of does. I mean, we're putting into human language a relationship that Jesus and the Father have that we can't even begin to understand. But we start to understand it by the time we get to the end of this particular chapter here. How about through him he made the world? Yes, sir.
The idea of an heir also points to the process that is not yet there. So he's,
Good.
you are the heir of your father's estate, but you haven't received it because of certain conditions. So I think that's looking at the process.
The sequence of events, a process. Yes, that's right. And so Jesus, this being we call Jesus, is more than just a really good guy who loved kids and did some miracles. There's something very unique and special about him. And through him, God made the world. Does that say anything to you? Does that impress you at all? It's kind of hard to me to think that this person, this being that was on the earth, was involved in the creation of the world. It's out of our ability to understand that. And yet the writer here is emphasizing that it really is true, that Jesus is that special. Jerry?
Who sent? What about the Savior? Who sent me? He says, say, I am sent you. I am.
Mm-hmm.
So he is all. I don't know if that, it describes, I don't think man really knows when he's saying God that it describes all the things about God. But he is who he is. He's the only one. I am.
I'm the only one like this. One time Jesus even used that as he described himself, making the Jews mad at him again. But through him he made the world, and we read in John 1 those very statements by the Apostle John, that Jesus is more than just a good guy. He was more than just the individual that died on the cross. The very essence of Jesus is the creator. And that's hard for us to understand, but it would be very hard for the Hebrews to. So he starts out with that powerful phrase. And then number 3, he's the radiance of God's glory. What are some of the other translations that you have for this? I think one of them is the brightness, is the radiance or the brightness of God's glory. When you think of God's glory and a brilliant white light that's so powerful that would even drive you to the ground, like in the case of Saul at that point. I don't know if we can really understand the meaning of this clearly, but the radiance of God's glory. He is the complete reflection, the complete essence. He radiates out something that is so powerful. We call it the radiance of God's glory.
Well, it's the sun. Our sun, we can see it, we know it's up there, but when it shines on us, it's still part of the
Last night I went out and, have you looked at the buck moon? The brightest one was last night, 2 nights ago. But the first full moon of the summer is called the buck moon. And it's bright. I mean, this is the most brilliant buck moon we've had. It's just brilliant. And I'm thinking last night as I'm looking at that kind of goes to this point. Is the reflection of Christ from God is so brilliant that it is powerful. When you think of something radiating, you think of energy and power and strength. And I don't know, it's just a great phrase for me that he's the radiance of God's glory. And the next one, yes, go ahead.
Moses came down off the
Yes,
being in God's glory. His countenance was completely changed
he was a,
just from God's glory.
and he wore a veil to allow that fading to take place. Yeah. Just think of the radiance of God's glory. It's just a fascinating statement, and the express imprint of God. I like cookies, and I like it when Lena gets out her cookie making gun. I don't think you have that anymore, but she had a cookie shooter gun that she could pack full of dough, and she'd go, and she could make these cookies real fast. It was really nice because they got in and out of the oven quicker that way. But each one was just basically the same thing. Every time you shot a new cookie down there, and it was the express imprint of that tool that was on the end of it.
Jesus said, you see me, you see God.
It's just amazing that God, that is infinitely greater than us, wants us to somehow understand something about himself. And so he gives us his Son in a physical form to let us see some of the nature of God. Whenever you go out and you're printing something and you're making a stamp and you're imprinting that, you get to see kind of a copy of the exactness of what you stamped it with, right? So Jesus is the express imprint of God, the exact copy, the exact emulation of God. Anything else on that one? He upholds the universe by his word. He upholds the universe by his word. Explain that to me. Barbara, what does that mean?
He is so powerful, he's speaking everything there. What?
Yeah, even his words are powerful, let alone what he does. Jerry.
He created the world. He spoke it into existence.
Takes a little
That's how powerful his word
takes a little power to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you know, I've often wondered, this same word, Jesus Christ, can turn people to him and turn them away. It's very same word.
And that's usually because we don't want to understand what he's saying to us.
But, you know, it's ironic. It looked like his word would always turn everyone to him.
Not always the case. Yeah.
I know.
Jerry?
I was just thinking of Adam and Eve when they were present with God, and then they were totally separated from God. So eternity for them was non-existent because they didn't understand her. They just knew they were with God. That wasn't going to change. But as soon as they found out their life was going to be limited, they would die. Then that's how powerful God to them was.
You know, I've said this a number of times before, that I'm absolutely blown away with God's ability to create something out of nothing. But I'm even more blown away that he can create nothing out of nothing. What is space? It's a nothing. It's a void. It's something that exists, but it doesn't exist. The space between the micro aspects of an atom, there's just space between those little things flying around. Who created that? I mean, you think about that, and that is an incredible concept. creating something out of nothing is one thing, but creating empty space, that's just fascinating. Don?
Really, the scripture doesn't say he creates things out of nothing. Say he created things out of which are not seen, things that are not seen, which tells me that there's spiritual realities, and those spiritual realities were used by the Lord to create physical realities, or physical things that have existed.
Yeah,
temporarily.
we can only begin to imagine what he really did and how he did it. But the important thing is that Jesus was involved in that process. And that's the value to our study in Hebrews. And he made purification for our sins. All of a sudden, we get away from these other things and we come to the important one. These other ones are fun. They're kind of interesting and exciting to look at. But then he makes purification for sin. And of course, we realize that that's Jesus' death on the cross. But does that word purification, I don't know what your other versions might say, but it tells me that it was perfect. It was complete. And I guess a question I ask here is, they had the law of Moses. I mean, they had a perfect law. The law of Moses was absolutely perfect. But nobody could keep it. So what was the purpose of this law? Well, that's one. The discussion of what the law's purposes are is a lesson in and of itself. But, you know, he made it could not forgive sin. It could only convict you of sin. It defined sin. So something better than the law of Moses, even though the law was perfect, had to come. And of course, in God's plan, from before the beginning of time, he understood that it was important that we have an understanding of what law is, and also that understanding that we need something better than the law. We can go back to Galatians 3 and read through that and understand that something greater than the law had to come, even though the law was perfect.
And all these millions of people under the old law, millions, not one of them kept it, false, except
And so the law waited for 1,500 years for a perfect being to come along that could die to do away with it. So he made purification for sins. I wish we had more time to just sit on that one. And now we climb to the top of this ladder. He sits on the right hand of majesty. What does the right hand symbolize? If you're sitting at somebody's right hand, if you go to a dinner, a high dinner type thing, we don't do it so much in America, but in other countries, if you sit at the right hand of the head of the table, you are perceived as what? You're really important. You're the best guest that is there. So if you're coming in and just sitting down, don't take that particular seat because you might be a little embarrassed later. The right hand of majesty, he's sitting there as the most important person next to the head of the table. And again, it's symbology, it's figures, but it helps the reader, it helps us, it helps them understand that Jesus is more than just a really good man. That Jesus really has a very significant place in what we call the Godhead, or in deity. And the reader of this, the receivers of this, they would be impressed once again. Now again, they're being encouraged to not lose their faith. You know, you've got all of the different challenges to just to Christianity in general. What were some of the challenges that the Jewish Christians might have? What were some of the forces that were hitting them about their Christian beliefs?
Eating of meats. Eating of meats.
You had all the regulations, didn't you? You had all those restrictions and regulations. And the staunch Jews would say, look what you're leaving. Look what you're apostatizing what you believed before. Why did you go to Christianity? So you have all that pressure. You have the Judaizing teachers that were trying to do that to Gentile Christians. What was some other pressure that the Jews might have? Jewish Christians.
This new law was spiritual. The law that they wanted was just materialistic.
Yeah, that's true.
And so they had such a, they didn't even follow it. They were not spiritual people. You know, it was just like moving into a different world.
So as they did that, what were some of the pressures that would be pulling them away from being Christians instead of Jews?
Father Abraham, Ten Commandments,
Well, yeah, that's part of it. They're being pulled back. They're trying to be pulled back by the Jews. But what are some of the other forces acting on the Jewish Christians? The what? Yeah, that's part of it. That's kind of why he's writing the book here. The Romans, they're angry at the Jews at this point. The Romans are really upset. So if you're a Jewish Christian, you've got two strikes against you. You're a Jew and you're a Christian. And the Romans are really going to be on your case. I think one of the reasons he's writing this is because he may not have known that, you know, there's going to be this great revolution and overthrow of Jerusalem in a few years. But by inspiration, God is giving this letter to the Jewish Christians so they'll have something when the temple is no longer there. When the Jewish way of life is annihilated, they'll have something strong to stand on. A couple of more things before we get in here. 5 ways in which Jesus is superior to angels. As we said, the Jews really had their angels. They had angels doing everything. What are other religions that rely on angels? Okay.
There was some paganism that created their own
Angels, yeah. Islam is very heavy into angels. The Mormon people have their angels. Angels are a big thing, and we don't understand angels. There's a couple of good studies on angels out there, but they took angels really seriously. So when the writer says Jesus is greater than the angels, this is saying something to them. You know, we're not really wrapped up in angels. We think we can understand a little bit about them, but they're a created race of spiritual beings we have just very little information on. But he says that Jesus is greater than the angels, and there's several ways he does that. First of all, his name is superior to angels. What do you think he's meaning when he says his name is superior to the angels? Does it challenge your thinking anywhere? What name? Is it Jesus? Is it Jesus Christ? Or is it more than just those words? Son of God? Yeah. That whole complex of Jesus and the Christ and the Son of God and all of the other definitions of Jesus, I think goes into what it means when it says his name. It's not just name like Jesus, it's the whole package. Jerry?
I was thinking when Jesus came to this world, and he was hosted with all the angels, was out there.
Yeah, in the field.
Giving the world.
Yeah.
Jesus. So he had, and also he was having all the angels come to him to rescue him from
When he finished his 40 days of fasting, who came to help him? It was angels. What could he have called when he was on the cross? Legions of angels, you know. Angels were always, that race of beings is always there at the beck and call, but he never took advantage of them in that way. Yet his name is superior to angels, or than angels. I mean, I don't know if I completely understand what this means, but it says to me that the essence of Jesus, his name, his being, is far superior to any angel. Now, we think of angels in the book of Revelation. We see they're standing at the 4 corners of the throne of God, these powerful beings, these angelic beings. We think of the fact that 2 angels could come and destroy the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah. And we think of angels in different ways. But to think that just the name, the essence of Jesus, is superior to angels. If you're a Hebrew, if you're a Jew reading this, hopefully that would strike you pretty heavy. That this Jesus that I believe is God, that I'm worshiping, is indeed very powerful. Max?
I always thought that the appearance of Jesus, he was
Mhm.
Not anybody. He wasn't like Samson. If he'd have come like Samson, head taller than everybody, the most handsomest man on the world with beautiful hair and beautiful body, they'd have forgot about the angels.
But he's just a man.
He was just a man, and this is another unique thing about him. But you still wouldn't accept it.
Yep. He didn't come, and he didn't look like they thought he would come. Jesus is God's son. No angel can claim this. And I think we've talked around this several times, but claiming that God has a son, or the concept of a son, in itself is an interesting study. If you let it take you the wrong direction, you could almost get it that Jesus is a created son. And that's not true. It's just the Son in the fact that the Father has sent Jesus to the world to be a special sacrifice. It's not like the Son post-dated the Father, because God is timeless. And we think of God as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We talk about it, we think we understand a little of it, and then we read something that just blows that away. We cannot conceive or understand the essence of God. But it says that Jesus is God's son, and to the Romans that meant one thing totally different than the Jews. To the Romans, they had sons of gods all the time. To them, it was kind of an easy thing to understand how Jesus could be the son of a god. As a matter of fact, the emperor was called the son of a god. But to call Jesus the son of the God, the I am God, now that gets a little challenging. That gets a little, wait a minute now. And the writer here, by inspiration, is saying that's the way that we want you to think. That helps you maybe understand that Jesus is so special. That's why he can sit at the right hand. And all of this imagery that goes along with that. But no angel can claim. Now, what's the difference between God and an angel, among other things? They're created beings. They are created beings for a purpose. God is eternal. They had a beginning. They had a creation. However that went, whenever that happened. But God is eternal. So Jesus, as the Son of God, had no beginning. But no angel could say that. And again, it goes back to that angel discussion.
One thing that we have mentioned, but not too much, is that Jesus is seated at the right hand of the throne. Which angel did God ever give a day off? Or which angel has completed their work? When Jesus sat down, and in creation, when God sat down, that was because they had completed their work. They weren't tired.
Oh, yeah. Right. Different.
They had completed their work. There's no angel that, I don't know what they're doing exactly today, but they are working and they have not completed their work.
And as we get into the end of this chapter, which we probably won't tonight, we're going to see that angels in some way are ministering servants. And there's a whole study on that. Yes.
I've often wondered. Now, the Jews, whether they thought more of angels or Father Abraham. Father Abraham had seed promise of all. And yet, they held him in high esteem. But I don't know if they held angels higher than Father Abraham. And I've contemplated that, and I've thought about one thing, and I go to the other.
The point is, in Hebrews, they're way down here compared to where Jesus is. And that's the purpose of this first chapter, is to identify who Jesus is and how special he is. Jesus is the firstborn. He received worship from angels. And we've already mentioned a few places where Jesus was assisted by the angels. Angels bow down before him. If Jesus were just an angel or a created being, why would angels worship him? You only worship God. You only worship deity. And so the writer here is reaffirming that Jesus is the firstborn. Now, what does the firstborn mean? Well, in a family, if you are the firstborn son, you have a special status. In the Jewish family, the firstborn son was very special. Way back, before they started badly using the word Abba, Father, was the restricted right of the firstborn son to say to his father. After a while, everybody started using that. But that originally was a unique phrase that the firstborn son could use to the father. Jesus is the firstborn, but in what sense? Well, has there ever been another one? No. Is there ever going to be another one? We haven't got a second chance here. The firstborn, to the Jewish mind, you got to put yourself in the Jewish mind if you can, this meant something. Something more than, it's nice being the firstborn son, but in the Jewish mind, the firstborn sometimes got the double portion. They were special and higher regard. They were looked up to be the assistant to the father, that kind of thing. It's an interesting study. But the firstborn, he receives worship from angels. And no created being could ever do that. And then angels are God's ministers, but Jesus is called God. We're not going to get into too much of it in the Acts reading, but I do want to go here to verse number 8. But of the Son, he says, thy throne, who? O God, is forever. The Father says to the Son, thy throne, Jesus, Messiah, Son, firstborn, is forever. The Jewish reader would say, wow, this really is an incredible being here. He's called God here. Jesus is literally called God here. And he claims that, of course, several times in John as we started to read some of those. Running short of time, so we get through these here. Jesus reigns from his throne, and angels are his servants. Does he reign today? When did he begin to reign? When did he begin to reign? Now, that's not meant to be a trick question. I understand that the reign of God is an interesting discussion by itself. But in regard to the church especially, when did he begin that reign? When he ascended. He ascended to be with the right hand of God. Again, the symbology there that there's some reigning going on. If you don't have a kingdom, can you reign? He is reigning over the creation, yes, but specifically, he's the king of us. He reigns over us, and that makes him very, very special. I'm going to run through these very quickly for your book there. Jesus loves righteousness and hates wickedness. And we could talk about what righteousness is and what wickedness is. We have a general idea of that. Jesus was that aspect of God that founded the heavens and the earth. They are the work of his hands. Again, God is this, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then we get John 1:1 in that section, that Jesus was involved in that creation. And again, in Hebrews, that he founded the heavens and the earth with his hands. Well, really his hands? Why did he use this phrase, with the work of his hands? Did he really use physical hands? No, it's a play on the words. That God was involved, he manipulated, he formed these things. The third part is the heavens and the earth will perish, but Jesus will remain. We were going to go over to 2 Peter 3 and talk about, the end of time, and the heavens will be rolled up like a scroll, and all will be burned up and destroyed. This earth, this universe, it's going to fulfill its purpose. But Jesus will remain. There is no end to Jesus. And two more here, I think. The heavens will be rolled up, but Jesus will remain the same, and his years will never end. Verse 12. I think there's one more. Yep. And the angels are called ministering servants. Jesus is not called a ministering servant. He's called everything else up here, the Son of God and the Creator and everything else. So all I wanted to do is give you a little inkling. There's just a lot of interesting things here in chapter 1, a lot of references to Old Testament material. I would encourage you, especially if you have a Bible that has some side references, to go back and read in the Psalms and some other places where some of these phrases come from, because some of these statements are parallels that they would have understood as Jews, as they would go back and say, you know, that's what it says in Isaiah, or that's what it says in Jeremiah, and it would mean a lot to them. So we're going to end it there. I had a whole bunch of other things to go over, but we won't do that now. Thank you for your time, and next week Todd is going to go over whatever he's going to go over, and then we'll get back into a normal flow of things when Andrew returns. He's gone this week to the preacher training camp down at North MacArthur and left his wife behind. But he did take one daughter with him there. So, okay, thank you. We'll have our next song.